Hey everyone, Jack here, TalkNorwichCity. Welcome back to another video. I hope you're all doing well. I thought I'd check in today, now that the dust has settled somewhat, to just reevaluate where Norwich City are at now, because so much happened over the weekend. I think whether you deemed Daniel Farke to have a long and prosperous future at Norwich City, or whether you thought his, he'd run his race, I don't think anyone quite expected it to end in the fashion that it did. Of course, Norwich City picking up their first Premier League win of the season away to Brentford. There were glorious scenes afterwards with Daniel and his players, with the fans, and the club needed that. The fans needed that. And mentally, it just puts you in so much of a better place than where we were at after, 10 games without a win. Suddenly, a win on the board, everything just seems a bit rosier. And I think everyone is guilty in football of having a huge degree of recency bias. The performance against Brentford was probably similar to that of Leicester when I look back to that game where we lost at home. If it wasn't for Tim Krul making a couple of wonder saves, a little bit of luck with VAR, a penalty decision, they're such fine margins. But Norwich City, I think, on the run of play against Brentford, deserved that win. But it was more about Daniel Farke, I guess. And look, I made my stance very clear. Does that make me happy that a man has lost his job? No, it doesn't. But it does make me excited for the future at Norwich City. But I get the outpouring of emotion and anger towards myself and maybe others that wanted Daniel to leave, because I don't think there was a fan in the whole city that wasn't, touched in some way by Daniel's connection to this football club. It's easy to forget. It certainly is for me, because my memory's awful, where Norwich were at when Daniel took over. I look back to that sort of 2015, 16, 17 period, and it's probably because there's been such carnage that has ensued after that. But we were in a really sticky situation. We were heavily reliant on James Maddison's sale towards the end of that period for the financial well-being of the football club. It was getting really messy in terms of the finances, but less financially. We just lacked such identity. We lacked purpose. And we'd thrown everything at this dream to survive in the Premier League under Houghton and Alex Neil, and then we came down and it was now we've got players that don't really want to be here, managers that were slightly confused about how to go about things, backroom staff that had maybe run their race, and we were left in a position that we were finishing mid-table in the Championship, and it was a really sort of meh feeling. It was is this what we've ended up with? And Daniel came in, and that first season in the Championship was a struggle. I think we finished 14th, didn't we? And there were periods during that time where you go, my goodness, is this going to work? And new signings that had struggled to adapt. I remember Stiepermann sort of playing at left back, and Mario Vrancic looked so off the pace. Players that went on to become, sort of Norwich City cult heroes, really. And I think Chris Gorham put it really well. He said that the biggest praise I can give Daniel Farke, that throughout the whole of his 4.5 years at the football club, his demeanour never really changed. And I think he had such a belief in his philosophy, and such a belief in the people around him that this would work, that he was confident the whole time that whether we were 14th in the Championship or winning the Championship at a canter, he was confident in his ways, and his mood never really seemed to change. And I think that 2018-19 season, for me, certainly, I can't see how that gets topped, as a fan, for me. My life was so carefree, and there were, I went to so many away games, and there was a spontaneity about it, and there was just no expectation that season. We'd sold our best player in James Maddison. We'd finished 14th. We'd signed a load of nobodies, really, or at least players that no one had really heard of. And it was just like, right, let's see what we can do. And the football we played, the late goals, just everything about that season was just joyous. And we went to the Premier League, and the first attempt at the Premier League, I think Daniel, he made mistakes, as did others at the football club, but it was kind of a, let's see what we can do, and we're not expecting much. And I think most fans understood that. And then another championship campaign where, granted, there was a bit of expectation this time because we had just players far too good for the league, and Buendia and Cantwell and Pukki and Aarons. The side was too good, but still the manner of the football, the way we did things, and there was a more of a defensive solidity about that, and a calmness that we maybe didn't see in 2018-19. And then we get back to the Premier League this time round, where I don't know if there was necessary expectation, but there was certainly a want to see improvement. The board had kind of given Daniel and Stuart money to work with, significant money for Norwich City. And after the project restart, where we lost 10 in a row, there was like, okay, like, we get why this happened, but now we need to kick on and we need to give this a go, because we don't want to be deemed that side that just constantly bounce between divisions. Nobody wants to be that team, or at least regarded as that team. We want to show that we're competitive. And the first 10 games of this Premier League campaign were poor. There's no other way to put it. There are a couple of moments of hope in there, I guess, but nothing really to cling on to. And I think it was at that point where I looked at the situation and thought, I really like Daniel Farke, and I don't want to see him diminish his reputation as a Norwich City manager, because he deserves more than this. And I think I had no evidence to base a turning of the tide. And I guess the beautiful irony in all of this is the fact that he was dismissed on a day where Norwich actually looked competitive and picked up 3 points, and there was hope amongst the fan base. And I think the timing for some won't make sense, because it came after such an important win for Norwich City, and it seemed like things were starting to turn. But I get it, and I said it on that live stream. Norwich now have 2 weeks to find a replacement. I think they've already got one. Interview them, get them in the door, meet the players. You don't have time in the Premier League. This is probably the only point in the season now where you've genuinely got a couple of weeks to just reevaluate and go again. So that's important. The timing does seem brutal, but as everyone's reported, the decision had already been made pre-Brentford, and I think that was wise. And I almost think it was nice that Daniel got to go out on a high. Imagine if he had have been sacked after Chelsea, that 7-0 drubbing. The recent memory of Daniel is multiple Premier League games lost and battered away to Chelsea. So to have that win as his final game was nice. And I think I can speak for most fans and say that Daniel will be remembered incredibly fondly at Norwich City. Not only did he produce 2 championship winning campaigns, but the manner of them championship wins were utterly beautiful. And he changed the direction of this football club from a club that lacked identity and were fading into championship mediocrity to a side that had something about them, did things in the modern way, were almost the textbook way of how to run a football club if you don't have a billionaire owner, along with Stuart Webber, of course, and the other influential members of that Norwich City board. But he was the man that figureheaded it, and he brought a community together. And I think as football fans, you want 2 things, really. You want a football side that's competitive, but more importantly, you want a club that you support where you feel a part of, and you feel like you belong, and you feel like that club has identity. And for the 4.5 years that Daniel Farke was at Norwich City, at least the majority of that time, it felt like Norwich had that. And I've never once gone to a away game or a home game under Daniel Farke's reign and it felt like a chore. And there have been times in the past under previous managers where going to Carrow Road has felt like a chore because you kind of know the outcome. Other than a few months of Premier League football, you never knew what you were going to see with Norwich, and that was a beautiful thing, and that's why we love the game. That's why it's such an entertaining sport. You never know what's around the corner. So I wanted to say that about Daniel, because I didn't want my thoughts on him recently to come across as a personal thing. I've had nothing but respect for Daniel Farke, but I think once the dust settles even more on this, and once people have got their head around what exactly happened at the weekend, I think people will understand that this was the right decision by the football club. And now Norwich must look ahead, and there'll be loads of content on the channel this week about who the next manager may be. My warning would be to maybe steer away from looking at betting odds too closely. These markets are really small, and even the smallest of money put into them will shift odds heavily. But I think the two at the top of the market are probably, it's going to be probably one of them. That's Frank Lampard and Knutsen, the Norwegian manager, who kind of shot to fame this year, having beaten Roma in the Europa League 6-2, I think it was, 6-1. And I think either of them managers would give something to Norwich, and we will go more into depth into that in the coming days. But I think, yeah, it's either going to be Lampard or Knutsen, I believe. Maybe there's going to be someone else who crops up out of the radar. But I think Stuart will already be very aware of who he wants, and I suspect the discussions have opened up already. So there we go. Daniel Farke's time at Norwich City is over. He leaves a lifelong memories for all Norwich City fans, and it's a shame that he couldn't quite conquer the Premier League, but I'm sure he will have an opportunity again, whether it be in the Premier League or another top flight in European football. I'm sure he'll deliver, because he's clearly a very talented head coach, and the majority of players that worked under him enjoyed his reign. So there we go. Daniel Farke, thanks for the memories, and best of luck. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.